Mr. Peter Bensinger is the former administrator of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, who was appointed to this position in January of 1976 by President Gerald R. Ford and confirmed by the Senate, serving for over 5.5 years under 3 presidential administrations as director of this major federal investigative agency. During Mr. Bensinger's tenure, DEA statistics said heroin overdose deaths decreased from 2,000 a year in 1976 to 800 in 1980, while heroin imports fell from 7 tons to under 4 tons per year. Federal legislation enacted in 1978 provided that the assets derived from illegal drug trafficking could be subject to forfeiture by the government. My name is Tyler Bass, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Bensinger today. Thank you so much for doing this, sir.
Happy to be with you.
It's awesome. Well, I just have a few questions for you, and I also know that there's some statistics you'd like to highlight about your time at the DEA and what's happened since, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to submit those facts and statistics as you see fit during this. So I guess it's pretty...
Well, let me start out.
Great. Please.
With the first big myth that a lot of people are hearing, that we've lost the war on drugs.
Right, right.
That drug use is more prevalent today than it ever has been. Now, that doesn't happen to be the fact. In 1979, according to the National Household Survey on Drug Use and Health, back then we had 25.4 million Americans over 12 using an illegal drug at least once a month. And that decreased in 1985, 1997, after the Just Say No program. It's climbing in 2005 and 2010. But there's a population today of 308 million Americans. And there's a population back in the early days, 1979, when it was 14% of the population. So there's been a 37% decrease as a percentage of use in the United States of illegal drugs. And I'm including marijuana, cocaine, heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and prescription drugs that are used non-medically. So I can't think of a public health problem that has decreased 37% over 35 years that would be called anything but a success. I want to share that with you, and I think the general public doesn't hear that.
I was wondering if you felt that there could be an increase in abuse, even while, even I'm not saying it factually, but there could be an increase in abuse while use dropped. You know, overdoses. I mean,
think what you'd need to look at as to whether there's really been an increase in abuse are treatment admissions, overdose deaths,
right.
That type of statistic. For heroin, we don't come close to the overdose death level of the 1970s.
Okay, interesting.
The treatment and abuse for marijuana has gone up. In fact, in Los Angeles, more people are in treatment centers for that than for alcohol. And that's another myth, that people are saying, well, marijuana, why don't we legalize it? 2 states recently did. I think that law will be overturned as soon as it gets in federal court. But it's a terrible idea. And it's not a safe or effective medicine. 18 states have said, let's have medical marijuana. But
well, are you referring to even the pill versions that contain THC, like Marinol, or
I would recommend Marinol. I'm talking about smoked marijuana.
Okay. What do you think about California having a medical, or any state having a medical regime that permits vaporized marijuana?
That does what?
That is vaporized. It's vaporized. It's water vapor.
I think there's a couple of interesting research projects. One of them is Sativex, which is a spray.
Right.
It's been used in Britain and Canada. Another, of course, is the existing legal marijuana that's in pill form, Marinol.
Right.
And a third that's just come on the market is a patch. It's being tested now to deliver some cannabinoids through the skin. I think those systems are far better than smoking. Since when is smoking good for your health? And marijuana has 60% more cancer-causing agents than tobacco. I do know one thing. Illegal drugs and legal drugs, particularly alcohol, when you get into trouble, we do have a problem with stigma. Mm-hmm. And I do believe in recovery. People can recover from addiction. But the more you make it available, the more the use will happen.
So here's a statement that I'd sent to you a little bit earlier. 12 years ago, the country of Portugal removed criminal penalties for typical possession of all drugs, instead offering criminal penalties only for distribution. 2 years ago, João Gallo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, president of the Institute of Drugs and Drugs Addiction, had this to say at a press conference marking the 10th anniversary of the change in the law. There's no doubt that the phenomenon of addiction is in decline in Portugal. Agence France Presse quoted Mr. Gallo as saying, the number of addicts considered problematic, those who repeatedly use hard drugs and intravenous users, had fallen by half since the early 1990s, when the figure was estimated at around 100,000 people. Do you consider that a legitimate claim? Do you think that's realistic, that in 10 years after decriminalizing possession, use, I suppose, that the number of addictions would fall?
This was just the subject of an interview on BBC by Melanie Phillips.
Right.
And there's a kind of a debate about what's going on in Portugal. This is a chart. I don't know if your viewers can see it, from the Institute of Toxicology and Drugs from 2001 to 2007. And these light-colored charts are the later years, and the dark are the earlier years in age groups. There's been a decrease for the first 6 years in 15 to 19, but an increase from 15 to 24 and 25 to 34. And I think what Ms. Phillips said was the European Union found that Portugal's drug use was even higher than some of the other states. So I haven't seen the figures that Dr. Gallo has had. I have read this BBC story, which is a rebuttal of Sir Richard Branson's testimony to the Parliament in England, and maybe we should study that greater. I do think Portugal has one thing that is useful, and that is that anyone that's involved in that system is getting seen by social workers or a panel on addiction. And it's not like legalizing drugs.
No.
As you said, it's a they don't carry a criminal sanction, but there is a consequence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, if you were to ask me where should we go, I think we need to intervene earlier. I think we still have consequences. I think testing is good. It works. It works in the Navy. Before they started testing, they had 30 or 40% of the enlisted people using various drugs. Yeah. Now that's down to nothing. And if you do come to the conclusion that using illegal drugs, whether it's heroin or marijuana, cocaine or crack, methamphetamines, is not good for your health or good for safety, then you want to discourage use. And I think that it's important for me to reinforce discouraging use. You have to have a reason to stop it. And if it's legal and it's available, you're going to use it, and more often.
Okay. Well, I have one more question for you. Thank you so much for your time today. But this is more recent news, and it's domestic, so it's down your alley. In December, well, it was a foreign bank, but in December, government authorities obtained a $1.92 billion fine from British multinational banking and financial services company HSBC, based on charges that the company transferred billions of dollars for nations under sanction, helping Mexican drug cartels launder tainted funds through our financial system, and worked closely with Saudi banks linked to terrorist organizations. The fine represented the collective efforts of the DOJ, the Treasury, financial regulatory agencies, and the Manhattan DEA. Lanny Brewer, the head of the DOJ's criminal division, said 2 months ago, HSBC is being held accountable for stunning failures of oversight, and worse, that led the bank to permit narcotics traffickers and others to launder hundreds of millions of dollars through HSBC subsidiaries and to facilitate hundreds of millions more in transactions with sanctioned countries. So my question to you is this, my final question. Do you consider the financial service organization, HSBC, receiving a fine of a couple of $2 billion? That's 5 weeks of their income. Do you consider that just, as opposed to any criminal prosecution inside of the entire organization? No criminal prosecution, they just get a big fine. Is that justice, in your opinion?
I would have, personally, I would have much bigger penalties. I think they got off too light. You might have been able to put people in jail. I got involved in that first Forfeiture Act in 1978 and 79. That's 81C, where assets derived from, traceable to, or intended to be used for a violation of the Controlled Substances Act is illegal. Now, the banks, apparently in this case, and they had an indictment, knowingly facilitated the movement of money in large hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So there are two groups of people, I think, that are getting off a little light.
Yeah.
That bank sounds like it got a light penalty.
Yeah, that's for sure, yeah.
The other group are the people that are distributing in mass numbers pain medications. This is a big problem in America, where the pain meds get distributed whether the person needs them or not. There's too much doctor shopping. There's too much abuse of legal medications. And you've got about 6 million people now dependent on prescription medications. So that's an untalked about subject. Now, they'll talk about it in Florida, where they've had pill mills.
Right.
And West Virginia, where they've had a lot of overdose deaths. But I think you raise a good point. And that's, do we mete out justice evenly? And in the case of this large corporation, does the penalty fit the crime? You're asking a former DEA administrator that is 25 years from being familiar with this existing case. But on the surface of what you've said, I'd say the punishment didn't fit the crime.
Well, great. Well, thanks for this interview. I really appreciate it. You've been very instructive.
I think Forbidden Knowledge does a great service to the viewing audience on a variety of subjects, some of which I disagree with, some of which I agree with, some of which I'm shocked at. But your communication is an important resource, and I'm happy to be with you today.
Well, thanks. I hope Forbidden Knowledge runs it, and I think they will, of course. And we're going to do a write-up about this interview on Internet Chronicle. So that's another place, too, to check it out. Well, thank you so much, sir, for your time, and I hope you have a great day.